first dance that I went to in Nelson, I was just a kid and got dragged up by my mother to do Hull's Victory with Shorty Durant. And he sang it. He sang every note of it. Yeah. And then I used to dance that to Ted Cromack in Leverett, Mass. And he used to sing every note.
Everybody did.
Yeah, of Hull's Victory.
Yeah.
And that was the only contra they did, at least in Leverett. So I got started dancing on a farm in Fremont, New Hampshire. The man played the fiddle that I worked for, and his wife had the Good Morning book, and she was into.
That's Henry Ford's book.
Yeah, she was very much into neighborhood type of activities, and she'd read about kitchen junkets, so she thought that would be a good idea. So we used to dance in the kitchen, which I thought was pretty neat. And some of you have seen the film, so I don't have to go over it for the 5th time. But that was the first dancing I did. And there was a lot of skipping up and down, hand clapping, whistling, pooping. And
I don't want it between my eyes.
So we would, that's how I learned to dance. Then I went to agricultural high school down in Walpole, Mass. And I was immediately told that I don't skip. And the Ashman family, Maud Ashman and her husband, Elmore, he was the pomology teacher, were into doing square and contra dancing to Ralph Page, and so they opened a class there at the Aggie. And the boys that came to that school all lived in Norfolk County, or thereabouts. I lived in Middlesex County. And they had dances every Monday night. And the girls came, the school was open to girls, but we didn't have any girls. So the girls came in from the local towns like Sharon, Dedham, Norwood, places like that. And so everybody looked forward to it. It was really great. And at that time, we learned how to do some of the contras. And Hull's Victory was one of them. Rory Moore was another. And then we'd had a festival at the end of every year called the Norco Aggie Folk Festival. And Ted Sinella would come down to call, and Ralph Page would come down. And they would train some of the boys to call dances. And it was usually singing calls, because the kids could sing pretty good, and it was easy to memorize the call. And although I do singing calls, I just wasn't interested in doing that. So there was a dance called the Crooked Stovepipe. And that was the dance I learned. And at that time, there was no recording, but there was a French-Canadian recording called Reel de Gondolier. It was crooked, but it was basically the tune was played on an accordion and some footwork. And so I got up and learned to call that with the help of the Ashmans. And so that was that, and that worked all right, and that's what I called at the festival. And then I also learned how to call Lamplighter's Hornpipe with the phrasing, and we had good live music there at the festival, so I called that. And then about that time, I went to work at I went to take part in a Quaker conference called the High School Institute of International Relations in Harvard, Mass. And Bob Trays was calling the dance that night. And he heard that I was a fledgling caller, and he asked me to call one, and he had records. So I called something to Darling Nellie Gray, and the record wouldn't wait. Goddamn thing wouldn't wait for me. So that was the end of I calling to recorded music. So I learned to play a harmonica, and for a while I played the harmonica and call at the same time. That didn't work too well. And somebody gave me an accordion, and it was a button accordion. And because by this time, Bob had become my mentor. And I wanted to, well, Paige was my calling mentor, and Bob was the musician mentor. And I wanted to play the way he did. So I picked up an accordion at a little shop in Keene, and it had buttons on both sides. And it didn't work. I couldn't make it work. And I was at a little party in Westmoreland, New Hampshire. There was a Finnish fellow there, and he said, "Oh, let me see that." And he sat up, and he started playing these polkas on it. I said, "How the hell does he do that?" Yeah. Well, then he explained it to me, so I went back to that shop and traded it in for a piano accordion. And things got going after that. By the way, Bob, that the fiddler in Page's orchestra one of them was Dick Richardson, and I was playing his fiddle yesterday. His daughter gave it to me, and I'll play it this afternoon. So that brings it up. So then I got into Stockbridge School of Agriculture up at the University of Massachusetts, and formed a little square dance group there. And I was doing the calling, and then started making money. I remember the first day that I went to school, I hadn't even unpacked my bags. I was living in a room downtown, and this is in Amherst. And I went up to call on Lawrence Loy, Larry Loy was a caller, a recreationalist, 4-H worker, and a caller in the Amherst area. Singing caller for the most part. And so I went and talked to him, visited, and told him who I was and what I'd like to do. And his phone rang. And he answered. He said, "No, I'm booked on that day, but there's a young fella here who can do it." So I got my first job before I'd even unpacked. So then I went downstairs to the agronomy department, and Bob Brundage worked that place, and I was told that I should, meet him. So I did, and we were talking way about this and that and the other, and his phone rang. And, well, I can't do that, and Larry Loy can't do it, but there is a fellow here who can. Yeah. So I got 2 jobs before I was even unpacked. So I had to find a band, and somebody told me that, because I wasn't much at playing an instrument then. Somebody told me the fellow that ran the bookstore played the fiddle, and his wife played the piano. So I got them, and they were my band while I was at the University of Mass. So I remember one night they had a festival, University of Massachusetts Folk Festival, and they would invite some other people in to dance, and kids danced. And I invited Bob and Russ Allen and Johnny. I don't think Junior came on that one. And so they played for me. It was one of the most exciting things for me to play with that sounding band for all those kids at the University of Massachusetts. And I'd see somebody up in the fraternity house, and I'd say, "What do you think of the dance last night?" And some of them hadn't even been, but I asked everybody. I just thought that was so exciting for me to have that band.
When was this, Dudley?
That would have been I graduated in 52, so it was probably 51.
There you
51. Go. And then they had groups of people performing. And by that time, I'd discovered a great dance down in Chicopee. It was a French dance. And the people were French and Polish, and it was a pretty tough dance. You'd go in there and the lights would be out. And the man taking tickets was a fellow who'd selling tickets and listen to the hockey game going on in the back. And it was the lights out every other dance, a lot of foxtrots and waltzes, but and a very tough crowd, very tough, working class. But they do the quadrilles. The caller was one Ed Charette, and the band was the Golden Eagle Ballroom. The Golden Eagle dance band. And there was about 8 or 9 of them, and they played trumpets and saxophones and things like that. But when they did the square dances, they could really belt them right out. And there were French tunes, some of them crooked. And so I made friends with some of those people, and I brought them up to the festival. And they came in, and I used to listen to the radio on Saturday mornings. A lot of Polish music. Every other station had Polish music. But there was one station that had French music, and they'd play these records, and they'd have this thing going in the background. And I thought, these were all 78 records, and I thought they were broken. And so anyway, these guys came up, and so they were best dressed in suits and ties, and the women had high heel shoes and short skirts and upsweet hairbows, and they just walked right out on the floor. They didn't march on like a lot of the performing groups in costumes. They just were wearing the street clothes. Marched right on and did a quadrille, and they had a fiddler and a fella playing the accordion and then making his feet go. And I said, "Oh, that's where that crack in the record comes from." So they were great. That was wonderful. I used to go to dances to Jimmy Ross. Jimmy was a caller, and he worked with a big band out of Keene. I think the owner is still alive, Alan Kendall. And Alan played a trumpet, and they had a huge band, about 8 to 9 pieces of trumpets and saxophones and clarinets and a piano and a drum and an accordion, no fiddle. And Jimmy Ross was the caller, and the dance was held at the Marlborough Town Hall at Fort Byrne. And everybody that came, it was a really local dance. I mean, they didn't travel 100 miles to come to that dance. You couldn't anyway. There was old cars and old roads. So they would come and they'd fill that hall, and these people were all mill workers. Marlborough was a mill town. And I remember Arthur Williams was one of Arthur and Alan Williams, they were twins. And they said their job, they worked in Jaffrey at the mill, and they were loom fixers. Yeah. And but they'd Saturday night roll around, they put on the best clothes, and they'd go out. And the good thing about Jimmy Ross they would always do Money Musk. Always. This is a working class bunch of people. And they just pelted that tune out on the brass horns. Can you imagine it? Yeah. It's really something. Anyway, Jimmy Ross was the caller. Well, we went up to the fiddlers contest at Goddard College, and a fellow by the name of Ralph
Rinsler.
No, we didn't meet Ralph at first. I forget who I hired just to come up. But anyway, Jerry Ween was there, and
Ralph Rinsler?
Ralph came out of the gloom later on. we were asked to come up and play some music between the contests, some jigs and the reels and the hornpipes, and explain what they were. So there was myself and Joe Ryan and Dave Fuller, and there was one other. And so between the contestants playing the fiddles, we would play those tunes and describe it. And then we also had to play for a dance that night. A lot of people didn't remember that, but we played for a square dance that night. And the next day, when we were leaving, we had come up with Joe Ryan in the back of his pickup truck, and we were just getting into the truck. It was getting dark, and out of the gloom, out of the bushes, came this fellow. He said, "I'm Ralph Rinsler." He says, "I'm a scout for the Newport Folk Festival, and I'd like to have you come down and do what you did between the contestants." He said, "I'd like you to come down and explain the jig and the reel and the hornpipe in a workshop." I said, "Fine." So anyway, what ended up was a lot of telephone calls, and we ended up bringing 4 or 5 paid musicians and about 4 or 5 sit-ins and who came along for the ride. And somehow Newport was able to squeeze them in, find them a room, and then we bought the dancers, and they were paid, and we put on a show, and we were all dressed up. I mean, Saturday night in Nelson in those days, it was no sneakers and jeans, no t-shirts. It was Saturday night, dress up, so it was suits and ties and high heel shoes and long dresses, and it was elegant.
And at Newport is where you met Bob Beer.
That's right, yeah. And he invited us to his festival. And I remember we went over, Doug Cox and myself. Doug Cox is a violin repairman and makes fiddles over in Brattleboro. And so he and I went to play for a dance in Alexandria, Ohio. And we drove out, for God's sake. We got $10. We drove out. and we drove back, and on the way
It's
back...
the old mantra, driving hundreds of miles for dozens of dollars.
So we drove back, and on the way back, we went through Petersburg. And there was these 2 big burly fellas. One was Bob Beers, and the other one was Robert J. Lurtzimer. And Robert Joe Musica. And they were in a little amphitheater, cutting down trees, and leaving some shade ones. So there was some, and they had saws. They didn't have chainsaws, but they had saws, and they were working up a terrible sweat. And Doug and I watched that for a while, and then Doug shinnied up one of the trees that was obviously to come out, shinnied out and bent it over like that, and I hit it at the bottom of the axe, and down it went. And then we did another one. We did 4 or 5. He just shinny up, bend the tree down, and I'd whack it with the axe at the bottom, and over it go. Yeah, and we did that, cleared it a hell of a lot in a very quick period of time. But those 2, rather disgruntled, these 2 fellows. But anyway, that was the beginning of the Fox Hollow.